The morning of her 63rd birthday, Evelyn Hart awoke to silence. No calls, no messages, no letters. The only sound in her tiny home was the faint creak of aging floorboards and the wind brushing against the windows like someone begging to be let in. She lay in bed for a while, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above her, letting the silence settle into her bones. It had been 3 years since she'd last seen any of her children. Caleb, Nina, Jonas. Each name, when she said it out loud, tasted like salt and regret. After brewing herself a cup of instant coffee and warming leftover oatmeal, Evelyn sat at her small kitchen table and stared at the stack of cards she had written to her children the week before. Each one sealed with care, addressed in her neat handwriting, and each one returned to her unopened. Scrawled across the top of every envelope was a version of the same message. No such recipient. At first, she told herself it was some bureaucratic glitch. Addresses change, mail gets lost. But this had become a pattern. Letters vanished. Emails bounced. Even when she sent money to Jonas, hoping that maybe some maternal gesture might reopen a line of communication, it was refunded with a robotic PayPal notice. Transaction denied by recipient. Still, she hoped. It wasn't until her neighbor, Mrs. Kitteridge, showed her something that Evelyn's carefully built denial began to crack. "I saw this, and, well, I didn't know how to tell you," the elderly woman said, her voice trembling as she handed Evelyn her iPad. On the screen was a social media post from Caleb, handsome and confident in a crisp suit, standing in front of a high-rise bearing the logo of his tech empire. The caption read, "Grateful every day for the journey. Foster care made me who I am." Evelyn blinked at the word. Foster care? She scrolled through the comments. Caleb's followers praised his resilience, his journey, his strength. There was no mention of a mother. No old photos, no childhood memories that included her. That night, Evelyn sat in her attic, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, digging through a dusty trunk labeled family. There were albums, school crafts, handmade cards, proof, real, tactile proof, that she had been there, that she had raised them. And then she found the photograph. It was her wedding day. She stood in a simple ivory gown, clutching daisies. Beside her was a man in a gray suit, tall and smiling, but the face had been savagely scratched out. Jagged lines crisscrossed the image where his face should have been, as if done in a moment of rage or madness. The strangest part, the scratching was unmistakably her own work. She recognized the ink smudge from a cracked pen she had always used, bleeding just slightly into the photo's corner. But she had no memory of defacing the picture. She stayed up into the early hours, combing through the albums. Strangely, many of the photos had been altered. Her face blurred in some, fully cut out of others. Whole years were missing. No birthday parties after age 7, no high school graduation shots, no candid moments in the kitchen or at the beach. Her children's childhoods had been amputated from her life, piece by piece. The next day, she searched for them online. Caleb's digital presence was everywhere. Forbes articles, TED Talks, interviews, but never once did he speak of his mother. Not even a passing reference. Nina, now a therapist with a popular podcast, frequently discussed early childhood trauma, but only referred to an unnamed absent maternal figure she claimed died when she was 6. Jonas, the most elusive, maintained an art blog showcasing dark, surrealist paintings of a woman in shadows, none of whom looked like Evelyn. The final blow came when Evelyn searched her name. No birth announcements, no connection to her children, no family tree entries. It was as if someone had surgically removed her from public record. In a panic, Evelyn called Caleb's office. A receptionist picked up and cheerfully said, "Mr. Hart doesn't know anyone by that name. Please don't call again." Then hung up. She sat in her living room, clutching the wedding photo with the scratched-out face, and whispered, "Why don't they remember me?" Mrs. Kitteridge, ever gentle, suggested she speak to a lawyer. Or a therapist. Evelyn declined. She didn't want legal justice or psychological explanations. She wanted her children. She wanted someone to look her in the eye and say, "Yes, Evelyn, you existed. You mattered." Later that week, in a desperate attempt to ground herself, Evelyn returned to her old diaries. Page after page recounted stories of Caleb's allergies, Nina's first ballet recital, Jonas's imaginary friend, Rook. She could hear their voices in her mind, could recall the way they smelled after playing outside. But then she turned to the final pages of the oldest journal. "Torn," scribbled over. The last legible line read, "He said I'd forget. But what if they do too?" A chill passed through her. This wasn't simple estrangement. This was something deeper, something deliberate. And for the first time in years, Evelyn felt afraid, not just of being forgotten, but of the possibility that she had already been erased. The next morning, Evelyn packed a bag. It wasn't a suitcase, just a worn leather satchel she'd used for years, the kind that softened with age and memory. She placed inside it a small photo album, the returned birthday cards, and a copy of her will, unsigned, unfinished. She wasn't sure what she would need, only that she couldn't stay still any longer. The first stop was San Francisco, where Caleb's company, Hartware, sat like a glass and steel fortress among the skyline. His face adorned massive digital billboards, young, confident, magnetic. The very same face she'd kissed goodnight 1,000 times. At the reception desk, Evelyn introduced herself calmly. "I'm Evelyn Hart, Caleb's mother. I'm not here to cause a scene, I just need 5 minutes." The receptionist smiled politely, then typed something into her terminal. Her expression shifted. "I'm sorry, there's no record of Caleb Hart having a mother by that name. Would you like to leave a message?" Evelyn's breath caught. "Could you at least tell him I'm here? He'll remember me." The receptionist's smile froze. "Ma'am, Mr. Hart was raised in state care. There's no family on file." Before Evelyn could protest, 2 security guards approached. "This way, ma'am." Outside in the cold wind, Evelyn clutched her bag, dizzy with disbelief. Foster care? Later that night, in her motel room, Evelyn scoured every article she could find on Caleb. His origin story was repeated across countless interviews: abandoned at a group home, aged out of the system, worked his way through college coding at night. The narrative was airtight and made no mention of a mother at all. She found a phone number for the home he'd supposedly grown up in. When she called, the director said, "Cass, Caleb stayed with us until he was 17. He was one of the lucky ones." Evelyn hung up before she could ask who dropped him off. 2 days later, she arrived in Portland to find Nina. Her middle child had grown into a poised woman with soft eyes and a controlled smile. Nina now ran a trauma recovery clinic and hosted a podcast called Healing Forward. Evelyn had listened to several episodes during the bus ride up. In one, Nina described the loss of her mother in a, quote, tragic car accident at age 6. Evelyn had never been in a car accident. She waited outside the clinic until Nina stepped out with a patient. Evelyn hesitated, then approached slowly. "Nina?" Her voice cracked. Nina turned and frowned. "Do I know you?" "I'm your mother." Nina's face twitched slightly, then hardened. "No, I'm sorry. My mother died a long time ago." "No," Evelyn whispered. "I raised you. Your bedroom was yellow with stencils of ducks. You had a doll named Greta you took everywhere, even to the dentist." Nina took a step back. "That's impossible. Greta was buried with my mother." Evelyn froze. "Buried?" Nina pulled out her phone. "I'm calling security." "No, please." But Evelyn was already backing away. Her voice cracked. "Just tell me, why do you think I died?" Nina didn't answer. But Evelyn saw the fear in her daughter's eyes. It wasn't confusion, it was something deeper, something trained. Later, in a motel bathtub, Evelyn wept until her throat was raw. She didn't recognize her face in the mirror anymore. She looked like a woman halfway between worlds, part ghost, part stubborn fragment of something the world had already buried. The next morning, she caught a bus to the last child. Jonas lived in a quiet coastal town, tucked away in a converted lighthouse studio. He rarely posted online, except for occasional artwork. His paintings had always been odd, but lately they'd taken a disturbing turn. Bleak figures, half-lit faces, mouths open and silent screams. Evelyn stood outside his studio for nearly an hour, watching through the window as Jonas painted. Then, summoning what was left of her courage, she knocked. Jonas opened the door. His face was thinner, his eyes distant. Still she saw her boy there. "Can I help you?" "It's me," she said. "Mom," he blinked. "You're not her." Evelyn's hands trembled. "Yes, I am." "Jonas, please." He stepped aside and gestured to the paintings lining the studio walls. "That's my mother," he said, pointing to a canvas. Evelyn turned. The woman in the painting had dark auburn hair, piercing green eyes, and a sharp, angular face. She was nothing like Evelyn. "She raised me," Jonas said calmly. "I dream of her voice. She used to hum a song I still can't forget." "What song?" Evelyn asked, desperate. Jonas closed his eyes and hummed a melody that Evelyn had never heard in her life. That night, Evelyn returned to her motel and pulled out the one thing she hadn't yet used, a mail-in DNA kit. She'd never needed proof of her children. Her life had been the proof. But now, weeks later, when the results came, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, hands trembling as she read the report. Conclusion: no biological relationship detected. Probability of maternity, less than 0.01%. She dropped the paper. Somewhere deep inside her, something cracked. If she wasn't their mother by blood, and they didn't remember her in body or in mind, then who was she? There was something wrong with her memory. Evelyn had once prided herself on recalling the smallest details. Caleb's second-grade teacher, Nina's favorite bedtime story, the mole behind Jonas's left knee. But now, those memories flickered like dying bulbs. When she tried to picture their first Christmas in the house on Meadow Lane, the tree appeared, the ornaments, the smell of pine, but the children's faces wouldn't come into focus. Worse, some years simply weren't there at all. Whole months missing, like pages torn from a book. She decided to start from the beginning. Evelyn took the train back to her hometown, a weather-worn place called Ashwood Falls, where everyone still remembered when the grocery store caught fire and when the river froze so thick you could skate across it. She stopped first at the public library, requesting her old yearbooks, local newspapers, and public records. A few hours in, she confirmed her birth certificate, her marriage license, but something felt off. Her wedding announcement had run in the local paper, yet it listed her husband only as Mr. H. Hart. No first name, no photograph. Even stranger, there were no birth announcements for her children. When she confronted the librarian, a kindly man who had been in school with her, he furrowed his brow. "Didn't you move away after the accident?" "What accident?" Evelyn asked. He hesitated. "I thought, well, maybe I'm thinking of someone else." But he wasn't. She could tell by the way he looked at her, as if struggling to square the woman in front of him with the one in his memory. Feeling both hunted and invisible, Evelyn visited Dr. Willis, her former physician. He had retired years ago, but his office had passed to a young internist named Dr. Ramey. Rami agreed to show her old medical records, at least what remained of them. There were gaps. One section stood out, a blank space between 1998 and 2002. The only entry during that time was a scanned hospital admission slip from Willowbrook Psychiatric Center, dated June 15, 1999. The discharge date was missing. Evelyn blinked at it. "This must be a mistake. I was never institutionalized." But the signature at the bottom was unmistakable, her own. The record didn't explain why she had been admitted, only the diagnostic code. F23.3. Acute polymorphic psychotic disorder with symptoms of schizophrenia. She left the clinic numb, the paper folded tightly in her coat pocket. Later that night, Evelyn drove to the edge of town where a long-abandoned storage facility stood. It had been listed under her name in a file Dr. Rainey printed when checking old addresses tied to her insurance. She didn't remember ever renting a unit. The door creaked open after a bit of force. Inside, dust coated every surface like a burial shroud. There was only one box marked in faded Sharpie. E.H. Personal, do not open. She opened it. Inside were 3 things: a hospital bracelet with her name and the Willowbrook ID number, a child's drawing done in crayon, 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a smiling sun, written in crooked letters at the top, "My real mommy," and finally, a Polaroid. Evelyn's breath caught. It was her husband, the man whose face she'd scratched out in the attic photo. But this time the picture was intact. He was standing beside a woman Evelyn didn't recognize, young, beautiful, with warm eyes and delicate features. In front of them stood 3 children: Caleb, Nina, Jonas. They looked happy. They looked whole. The woman's hand rested on Caleb's shoulder, her fingers curved protectively, the way Evelyn used to do. And Evelyn knew, without understanding how she knew, that this was the same woman Jonas had painted again and again, the woman he remembered as his mother. Evelyn dropped the photograph, her hands shaking. She was spiraling now. If this woman existed, if she raised the children Evelyn remembered as her own, then what was Evelyn's role in all of this? She raced back to her motel and dug out the old journals. There were gaps, yes, but there were also scattered fragments of strange sentences that had once seemed like the products of grief or stress. One read, "The nurses say I'll adjust soon, but I still don't remember their faces." Another, "He visited again, said I was almost ready for what?" And this one, scrawled in a shaking hand, "I saw them through the glass. They looked at me like I was a stranger." Evelyn clutched the pages to her chest. Had she watched her children from a distance? Had she once stood on the other side of a one-way mirror, forgotten even then? The only lead left was Willowbrook. She had to go back, had to see it for herself. The hospital had closed years ago, after a scandal involving unethical experiments in memory treatment. The kind of place whispered about in nursing homes and conspiracy forums. She made a call to a woman who had once worked there. A nurse. The last person Evelyn could find who had remained on staff until the facility shuttered. When Evelyn asked for a meeting, the nurse said only one thing: "You don't want to remember what happened there. But you came back more than once." Evelyn's world tilted. Back? More than once? What kind of mother forgets raising her children? What kind of woman lives a life that doesn't belong to her? Evelyn Hart found the nurse living in a halfway house on the edge of the city, a forgotten place for people who didn't fit comfortably into the past or the future. The woman's name was Carla Devine, though she barely answered to it now. She sat by a window feeding breadcrumbs to a missing bird, her hands shaking from a tremor that had nothing to do with age. "You were one of the mothers," Carla said as Evelyn sat across from her. "But you didn't start that way, none of us did." Evelyn blinked. "I don't understand." Carla leaned forward. Her eyes were lucid, frighteningly clear. "Willowbrook wasn't a hospital. Not really. It was a testing ground. The Maternal Identity Reorientation Project, MIRP they called it. We thought it was grief therapy at first, helping women recover from the loss of children. But they weren't giving us back what we'd lost. They were giving us something new." Evelyn's throat tightened. "Giving you what?" "Memories," Carla whispered. "Children that weren't ours. They used scent triggers, lullabies, recorded voices. Repetition, injection-induced dreams. They found women whose minds had fractured, women who needed to believe they'd mattered, so they gave us borrowed families, assigned us identities like costumes." "That's insane," Evelyn said. Carla looked at her with pity. "Then why are you here, Evelyn, looking for children who don't remember you?" The room felt suddenly airless. Carla stood, rummaging through an old drawer. She returned with a file, yellowed and brittle with age. Inside was a photograph, a group shot of women in hospital gowns holding dolls instead of babies, as if practicing for lives they didn't yet own. Evelyn saw herself. Her own face, staring ahead blankly. A man stood beside the group, clipboard in hand, expression clinical. Her husband. Henry Hart, Carla said. He was one of the lead technicians, said he volunteered his own family for the control group, thought it would make the data stronger. Evelyn staggered to her feet, bile rising in her throat. No, he loved me. He loved our children. Carla just shook her head. Or maybe he loved what you were becoming. You were the most successful subject. They said you adapted almost instantly. The children responded to you, especially the youngest. Evelyn fled the halfway house, ears ringing with the words assigned identities and borrowed families. She checked into a nearby inn that night and stared into the bathroom mirror. She tried saying their names aloud, Caleb, Nina, Jonas, as if the sound might anchor her. But even the syllables felt suspect now. A storm raged outside, wind rattling the windows like fists demanding entry. Unable to sleep, Evelyn made a decision. She would submit to hypnotherapy. Not the airy kind found in spa retreats, but deep clinical regression, the kind used on trauma victims and recovered memory patients. She contacted a specialist, a woman named Dr. Amita Rao, who agreed to meet the next morning. You understand, Dr. Rao warned, that recovered memories may not be reliable. Memory is plastic. What you remember may feel real without being true. Evelyn nodded. But I need to know what's missing. The session began with her lying back in a reclining chair, eyes closed, Dr. Rao's voice drifting through the air, like soft threads pulling at the tangled corners of her mind. Let's go back, Evelyn, before the children forgot you, before you forgot. Flashes emerged, sensory fragments at first, the scent of antiseptic, the feel of plastic sheets, a child's voice calling, Mama? But it wasn't hers. It wasn't any of them. Then came the whisper, a man's voice. You won't remember a thing. Her entire body jolted. Dr. Rao steadied her. You're safe. Follow the voice. Where are you? I'm in a white room, no windows. He's there. My husband. What is he doing? He's holding a clipboard, telling me I'm not ready yet, that I keep confusing the identities. Identities? I see pictures on the wall, flashcards, photos of children. There are numbers beneath their faces. I'm supposed to memorize them, respond to the names. Her heart pounded as she spoke. Dr. Rao's voice was calm. And do you? I try so hard. I want them to love me. I want to be their mother. Do you remember being anyone else? Yes, Evelyn whispered. But I let her go. Who was she? Evelyn paused. I don't know, but she left something behind. A lullaby. Her voice began to hum. It was the same melody Jonas had sung, the one she didn't recognize. But now, she did. She woke with tears on her face. I wasn't always Evelyn, she said, breathless. I was someone else, and I took her place. Dr. Rao said nothing for a long time. Finally, she slid over a notepad. On it was a name Evelyn hadn't heard in years, Margot Vale. A missing person. A woman who had once shared a room at Willowbrook. A woman with no next of kin. And the signature on the hospital intake form? Not Evelyn's. It was Margot's. Evelyn stumbled out into the light, hands shaking. Had she stolen a life or been given one? It took Evelyn 3 weeks to find him. Henry Hart, or the man who once went by that name, had vanished so completely it was as if the earth itself had swallowed him whole. No death certificate. No financial footprint. It wasn't until she accessed an old joint insurance policy that she discovered an inactive life insurance payout redirected under a different name. Howard Ellis. A new name. A new life. She followed the thread to a coastal town called Brighton's Wake, a sleepy haven of crumbling lighthouses and fog-thick mornings. There she found him, not as a ghost, not as a fading photograph, but in the flesh. He was running a bookstore. Evelyn stood across the street, staring at the weathered storefront, the mine's lantern. The irony nearly made her laugh. Inside, Henry, or Howard, was shelving books with a gentle rhythm. He looked older, yes, but not in the way time typically wears down a man. It was as if he had deliberately sanded himself down, scrubbed out all sharp edges and recognizable features. He'd become the kind of person who disappeared into a crowd before you even realized he'd been standing there. Evelyn entered the store. He didn't look up until she spoke his name. Henry. His hand froze on a copy of Brave New World. A pause, then a slow turn. When his eyes met hers, the color drained from his face. "No," he whispered. "You can't be here." "I am," she said, "and I remember now." He backed away, knocking a stack of paperbacks to the floor. "Did you think I'd never find you?" she said, advancing. "Did you think I'd just forget? Again?" Henry's jaw clenched. He exhaled, then gestured toward a door behind the register. "Not here, come with me." She followed him into a cramped back office, where the smell of old paper and ink masked something colder, sterile, clinical. He sat heavily, shoulders hunched, defeated. "They told me you'd never recover," he said quietly, "that your mind couldn't hold the trauma, that the only way to stabilize you was to give you a life you could survive." "My life," Evelyn snapped. "You mean hers." Henry's eyes flicked up. "Margot Vale. Yes." She felt sick hearing the name aloud. "You were fragile," he said. "So was she. Margot had lost everything. Her children died in a fire. You were brought in as part of a study, the reparenting trials. You had no children, Evelyn. Not before. You volunteered. You wanted purpose." "I don't remember volunteering," she said coldly. "Because we took that memory from you, that was the point." His voice cracked, haunted now. "We gave you her memories. Modified, gentle, selective. The lullabies, the birthdays. You embraced them, Evelyn. You became her." Evelyn shook her head. "What about the children?" Henry hesitated. "They were real. Margot's. After her collapse, they were placed into temporary care. But the study took them too. They were part of it. Monitored, reassigned memories. Re-anchored to you." "Reassigned?" Her voice rose. "You programmed them?" "No. Not like that." His fingers trembled as he spoke. The goal wasn't to fake love, it was to rebuild it. If a child formed a new attachment after trauma, the brain could be coaxed to transfer emotional pathways. Love isn't just memory. It's habit, ritual, repetition. That's why it worked. They began to see you as her, and you began to believe it. "But it wasn't real," she said bitterly. Henry looked up. "It was real enough." Evelyn sank into a chair, exhausted. Her entire existence felt like a set of fingerprints smeared by someone else's hand. "Why did you erase them?" she asked finally. "Why make them forget me?" He swallowed hard. "Because it wasn't supposed to last. The study was meant to conclude after a year, return the children to their biological records, reintegrate the original memories, and move on." "But you wouldn't let go," he whispered. "You fought, you believed, you begged to keep them. And the children, they bonded to you so strongly we couldn't sever it cleanly, it would have destroyed them. So you destroyed me instead." Henry nodded slowly. "We wiped your memories, released you back into your original identity, but something went wrong. You found your way back." She stared at him. "You never thought I'd come looking." "No," he said, eyes brimming, "because no one else did, not even me." A long silence stretched between them, interrupted only by the ticking of a wall clock and the sound of seagulls crying outside. "I raised them," Evelyn said at last, tears gathering. "Maybe it started with a lie. But the love was real. I felt it. They felt it. "I know," he whispered. She stood. "What happens now?" he asked. Evelyn turned to him, eyes steel. "Now I tell them the truth." And as she walked out of the store, the bell above the door rang with finality, like the end of a chapter neither of them would ever read again. Jonas's apartment was a chaotic sanctuary of paint tubes, canvases, and half-finished portraits. Evelyn stepped inside, feeling like an intruder in a shrine dedicated to someone she couldn't quite place. She moved slowly past the stacks of canvases leaning against the walls until she saw it, a large painting of a woman. Not Evelyn, but a stranger. Soft features framed by tangled dark hair, eyes full of a quiet sadness. The woman was seated in a worn armchair, her hands folded in her lap, as if waiting. Jonas appeared behind her, silent as a shadow. "She's real," he said quietly. "I don't know who she is, but she's the only mother I remember, not you." Evelyn's heart hammered. "Do you know what this means?" Jonas continued, his voice a mix of hope and confusion. "You're not the woman in my memories. Someone else was. And I've been painting her, trying to hold on to her." "Who painted these?" Evelyn asked, voice trembling. "I did," he said. "All of them." For years, Jonas had been painting this woman obsessively. Not just portraits, scenes of domesticity, quiet moments, a shared meal, a bedtime story, a walk in the park. Every brushstroke captured a love he didn't have words for. Evelyn reached out, fingers brushing the edge of a canvas. The woman's eyes seemed to follow her. "Her name is Margot," Jonas said almost reverently. "I found her name in an old diary hidden in my studio." Evelyn's breath caught. "Margot, the missing woman from Willowbrook." "I need to find her," Evelyn whispered. Jonas nodded, grabbing a faded leather-bound journal from a shelf. "She wrote this. She was part of a program, some kind of therapy, but it went wrong." Together, they pored over Margot's journal, pages stained with tears and fear. Margot wrote about losing her children in a fire, about slipping into a fog of despair, and about the hospital ward where the women were given new lives, new identities to fill the void. "She says she disappeared from the program," Jonas said, voice cracking. "No one knows where she went." Evelyn's mind spun. Had Margot really vanished, or had she been erased? Late that night, Evelyn drove to a public records office and requested every file connected to Margot Vale. The clerk handed her a folder labeled Confidential Restricted Access. She leafed through documents describing a psychiatric program experimenting with identity reassignment, planting memories and personas into women to help them cope with trauma. One document caught her eye, a medical intake form with Margot's signature, but the name on the patient ID bracelet inside was Evelyn's. Her hands shook. It wasn't just a therapy gone rogue. Evelyn was Margot. Or more terrifyingly, Margot's identity had been overwritten by hers. The lines between the two women were blurred, fractured beyond repair. She was living a borrowed life. Back at Jonas's apartment, Evelyn found the largest portrait of Margot, the one where she sat quietly in the armchair. Underneath, faintly scratched into the canvas, were words Jonas hadn't noticed before. "Who I was, who I am, who I'll never be." Jonas looked at Evelyn, tears welling. "You're their mother now," he said, "no matter who you were before." Evelyn swallowed hard. But at what cost? The answer haunted her long after she left. Somewhere, buried in layers of memory and paint, was a truth that neither Evelyn nor Margot could reclaim. Only a shadow of love stitched together by fractured minds and desperate hearts. It began with a lullaby. Soft, threadbare in Evelyn's throat, the words came unbidden one night as she sat alone in her living room. A song from a time she couldn't place, with a melody that curled like smoke through her chest. "Hush now, my darling, the moon's in the tree, the stars will keep watch as you dream next to me." The same tune she used to hum while rocking Jonas to sleep before he could even form words. But the twist came days later, when Jonas, unprompted, sang the same lullaby in an interview for a gallery showcase. "I don't know where I learned it," he told the reporter, voice low. "But it makes me think of her, the one who raised me, the one I painted." When Evelyn watched the clip, her blood turned to ice. The melody wasn't Margot's, it was hers. It had never existed in the documented therapy prompts. It wasn't part of the implanted routines. It was a song she'd made up during a rainy night, holding Jonas through a fever. She remembered now. Remembered the sweat on his brow, the rasp of his tiny cough, the way he clutched her fingers so tightly. You couldn't fake that. Could you? Meanwhile, Nina, ever skeptical, began unraveling the lies she'd built her career upon. It started with the journals. For years, Nina had believed Evelyn died when she was 6. The grief, she claimed, had shaped her entire path, drawn her to psychology, to helping others heal the same wound she bore. But when she revisited her old notebooks, looking for a passage she remembered vividly, a recounting of Evelyn's funeral, she couldn't find it. In its place was something else entirely, a crayon drawing labeled Mom's birthday cake, dated months after the supposed accident. Another page, previously torn, had been awkwardly taped back in. Nina peeled it open and found a photo tucked inside, a Polaroid of Evelyn, young and smiling, holding a homemade cake beside a clearly 7-year-old Nina. The caption read, "Best Mom Ever." Her hands trembled as she stared at the image, her handwriting, her memory, but not her belief. Everything was fracturing. And then Caleb, rational, data-driven Caleb, began having flashes of a childhood that didn't align with the foster care files he'd spent years trusting. During a pitch meeting at his tech company, he suddenly blurted out, "Didn't my mom make cinnamon toast with sugar edges?" The boardroom fell silent. He laughed it off, but the memory lingered. So specific, so sensory. The sound of the butter sizzling, the taste of brown sugar crisping on the crust, the way she'd call it Caleb toast. He asked his assistant to pull his foster records again, and that's when he noticed it. Metadata anomalies. Timestamps altered. A document generated 2 years after the date it claimed to have been created. Deep in his company's AI archive, he ran the files through authenticity analysis. The verdict: synthetic. Implanted. Fabricated history. Caleb confronted his legal guardian, now elderly and distant. The man admitted under pressure. "You weren't supposed to remember her. It was cleaner that way." Memory wasn't lost. It had been buried. The siblings each, in their separate lives, found their reality unraveling in the same week. And Evelyn, heart-pounding, called them together. They met at the house they once shared, a modest brick structure, long since sold to a family who let them use the backyard for an unofficial reunion. Caleb arrived first, silent, scanning her with eyes that now held uncertainty rather than denial. Nina next, visibly shaken, holding the journal with the taped page. Jonas came last, carrying the smallest of his paintings. None of them spoke for a long while. Finally, Evelyn said, "You remember me." Not a question. A statement. A hope. Caleb answered first. "I remember a laugh that filled the kitchen. You used to make up stories about spoons having secret lives." Nina stepped forward, tears brimming. "You were there when I had night terrors. You told me monsters wore ties and hated hugs." Jonas simply held out the painting. It was of Evelyn. Not Margot, not a blur, but her. Evelyn took it in shaking hands, the image a perfect echo of the person she still saw in the mirror. "I don't know what's real anymore," she admitted, "but I know what we felt." And that's when she told them. About the therapy, the memory reassignment, the woman named Margot, their father's deception, her own confusion. How love, forged in the fire of falsehood, had still become something true. At the center of all their fractured pasts was a strange, impossible truth. Evelyn wasn't their biological mother, but she had become their real one. The twist came not in genetics, but in attachment, in neuroplasticity, In love, imprinted so deeply it rewrote the mind's pathways like a second birth. Nina stared at her, stunned. We didn't just forget you, we were made to forget you. And still, Evelyn whispered, you came back. As the sky dimmed into dusk, they stood there, four souls caught between what was and what should have been. None of them noticed the old neighbor watching from the window next door, but she noticed something chilling. In the yard, where no one stood, the faint impression of a fifth shadow stretching toward Evelyn, one that didn't belong to any of them. The house felt too quiet. Evelyn sat at her old kitchen table, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, steam curling up from tea she hadn't touched. Around her were fragments of a life that had been returned in pieces, photographs the children had rediscovered, drawings Jonas brought from his studio, the journal Nina had found, now filled with sticky notes and highlighted truths. But Evelyn's eyes were fixed on a form on the table. A white intake sheet, signed, dated. Voluntary readmission to Willowbrook Psychiatric Institute. Outside, the wind stirred dry leaves across the porch. She half expected Caleb to barge in, to stop her, or Nina to call, or Jonas to arrive, asking to paint her one last time. But none of them came. They knew. She had explained everything. Explained how Margot had disappeared from the program, and Evelyn, fractured, lonely, raw from loss, had been chosen, molded, inserted. Not by accident, by design. The doctors had known she was vulnerable. Her own grief, her own lost child, had made her the perfect candidate for identity reassignment. The therapy was supposed to give her closure, a second chance at motherhood. And for a while, it worked. She loved them, raised them, and when the program fell apart, and the real mother never returned, no one had the heart to undo what had already rooted itself so deeply. Except the father. He erased everything to spare the children confusion, and in doing so, left Evelyn in a purgatory of memory. Until now, the children knew the truth, and they were unraveling again. Caleb, furious, wanted revenge on the institute. He was already filing lawsuits, hiring private investigators. Nina, caught between her clinical detachment and the collapse of her own narrative, had suffered a panic attack after seeing a photo of her childhood with Evelyn that shouldn't have existed. Jonas stopped painting altogether. "If I paint you now," he said, "I'm afraid you'll disappear." So Evelyn made the only decision she could. She would disappear first. Not with deceit, not with false deaths or fabricated records, but with choice. The door creaked open. A familiar figure entered. Drive. Hallstrom, once her attending physician, now the director of Willowbrook's research division. His face was older, sadder. "You're sure?" he asked, softly. Evelyn nodded. "I've made peace with who I was. And who I wasn't." He hesitated. "This therapy is irreversible. If you go through with this, you'll forget them, all of them." "I already lost them once," she said, voice trembling. "I won't let them lose themselves again." She stood, gathered the intake sheet, and followed him outside. But as they walked toward the car, Jonas stood waiting near the gate. "Don't," he pleaded. "We can fix this. We were a family, Evelyn." She touched his cheek gently. "We are, my love. But the more you try to make it make sense, the more it breaks you." "You're my mother." "I was," she whispered. "And I'll carry that in whatever part of me they don't erase." Tears streamed down his face. "You know what the doctors said?" Evelyn said with a soft smile. "That love like this, it rewires the brain. That the children adapted because they felt me. That I became real not through blood, but through devotion." Jonas nodded, lips trembling. She kissed his forehead and stepped into the car. The last thing she saw through the back window was Jonas lifting a paintbrush again. Later, in the sterile calm of the Willowbrook facility, Evelyn changed into a gown, laid on the memory therapy table, and stared at the ceiling. A nurse entered with the sedative. Another followed with a clipboard, but then something changed. The lights flickered, the machines glitched. And in that moment of hesitation, Evelyn heard something or someone, a child's voice, from inside her own mind. Not Jonas, not Caleb, not Nina. Another voice, soft, curious. "Will you still remember me, Mama?" Evelyn gasped. The real child. The one she lost long before the institute. The one whose death opened the void that let Margot's identity take root. She remembered now, a baby with chestnut hair and eyes like storm clouds. Fevered nights, a misdiagnosis, a goodbye too short. Her child. She sat up. "Stop," she told the nurse. They stared. "I changed my mind. But I won't forget them. Any of them. Not again." She rose from the table, trembling but alive. That night, she left Willowbrook for the last time. No fanfare, no grand exits, just Evelyn, a woman who had been mother to 3 children, and more than one version of herself. She returned to her little home, no longer waiting for love or memory to save her. She had saved herself. Weeks later, the children gathered again. Not to unravel the past, but to begin a new story. One where reality didn't need to be perfect to be true. And in her final journal entry, placed neatly on a shelf beside old photographs, real and imagined, Evelyn wrote, "They may forget me again, or I may forget them, but love is the only memory that rewrites the soul, and that will never fade." As the wind stirred the pages, a final twist arrived, quietly. The journal was signed, Margot Vale, but below it someone had written in different ink, "Evelyn Hart was here, and she was loved."